Hello, welcome. My name is Nolafis, and today it's time to go back, all the way back to the distant past of 2020.
COVID-19, the disease that defined
This
our
first
lives in
song is called
2020.
A World on
2020
Fire.
is now the deadliest year in U.S. history.
Well, maybe we don't really want to go back there. Instead, enjoy a brief look at maps in that time period. At least that was my idea with Old School 2020. This is a transitional tech map that was track of the day on May 8th, 2024, making this my fourth track of the day, and I'm very happy with how it came out. The player base also seemed to like it for the most part, but we'll get into more detail on that later. For now, I'd like to take a look at the thought process behind the map and why I built a map like this in the first place. At first glance, this seems like a very strange map to make, especially for someone who makes mapping rules for YouTube, as the route goes directly against a lot of what I say people should do. There are a few straight lines, decently sized jumps, and blind corners. I will say, the map was built with these elements in mind, so why did I do it? Well, part of the reason is that I'm always looking for mapping trends and analyzing why they exist. Partly so I can better my maps in the future, but also to deconstruct those trends and see where they don't apply. It's not enough for me to know that you shouldn't build large jumps. I want to know why and where exceptions may exist. I've always found it super fun and fascinating to break metas, whether that's using Parasect as a hard counter to Keldeo back when I battled Pokemon competitively, or using a large jump to help maintain gears. And right now, the current meta is to build tight routes with little to no airtime, featuring cool transitions and tricky gears. But it wasn't always this way. The idea for this map started when I took a look back at some of the maps I started playing the game with. I don't have that long of a history with Trackmania. TM 2020 is my first Trackmania title, and I started playing late 2021. However, when trying out the free version of the game, I spent a lot of time in the arcade room, and most of the maps that were being cycled through were built shortly after the game released. And you know what? They're fun. They might not be as polished under today's standards, but players back then weren't lamenting about how awful their maps were, and these maps were popular for a reason. So playing them again, as well as some of the older Nadeo campaign maps, I noticed some key differences I wanted to try to make work. First, there seemed to be a lot more space between elements. If there was a large jump or drift, the players were given plenty of time to set up for it. Second, they weren't afraid of airtime. Jumps were a very common element, and a lot of maps had at least one bigger one. Third, builders played around with gears. Now, it seems most mappers stay away from gear ups and downs entirely. And fourth, routes were a bit blind. Memorization was a skill people had to use to get around some of the corners. So with these ideas in mind, I started building. I tried not to go too overboard, but my goal was a clean, slightly awkward route that would stand out nowadays against the sea of perfectly calculated maps. I'm not saying perfectly calculated is bad, there's a reason the meta has shaped itself around that concept, but with a lot of complaints recently about track of the day maps all being the same, I wanted something that would more easily stand out, with a dash of nostalgia bait for added flavor, of course. To add to the theme, I also restricted myself to only the blocks that were available on release. So no plastic, water, colored wood, nothing. And I also stuck to that with the scenery. Judging by some of the comments about my map, I think I nailed it. Now, whether or not people actually liked that fact, I'll go over a bit later. But for now, I want to go over some spots on the map I think are interesting. The first being the cut transition heading to the third checkpoint. I had people asking me in map review if this was intentional, and yes, it is. The jump worked while being a little awkward, and I think it makes a perfect intro to what the map is trying to be. I also saw some people insisting on going the long way around, so thanks to those people for taking the wrong way and still not voting 1 star in map review. I appreciate it. The next spot comes right after that with the large downhill into the jump. This was meant to balance out the big drift and let everyone gain back speed, even if they didn't take it that well. If you do take it well, however, then you get 5th gear, but I still wanted the rest of the map to be in 4th. So the large jump afterwards takes the car to a higher elevation to slow it back down to 4th gear. Normally, I don't have nice things to say about these larger jumps, so I thought it was cool I built one that served multiple purposes and wasn't just flashy. The last specific element I thought was interesting was the last road circle before the finish. When I put this in, I had no idea which side was actually faster. After playtesting, I was pretty sure going to the right was the correct line, but I saw a split in the player base during qualifying. Some went left, some went right, even in the top percentage of players. It wasn't until after Cup of the Day that everyone started taking the right path, and I thought it was cool to see some people arguing about it during qualifying. As a slightly smaller restriction, I also wanted to make platform drifts featuring the narrow roads. Most maps nowadays are very tight, and I think these blocks are underrated, as they promote staying on the correct line, but also don't punish the players nearly as hard as a wall does when going off course, which is also why I was able to get away with having some blind drifts. If players missed it a bit, they ran over some penalty and kept going. Not to mention, finding spots to run over the penalty to save time is an interesting way to help differentiate players. Since I wanted to use those blocks, tech was pretty much the only option. And I definitely wanted some janky transitions, so I settled on transitional tech. With the jumps and auto drifts I put in the route, it's not the most faithful to that style, but close enough. For the scenery, I kept it clean and simple. I really like the grass plus wood look, and I put some larger structures to keep things visually interesting and not have everything be the same, which also came in handy as the black undersides of the supports makes a great contrast to the brighter greens and browns of everything else. And some pink trees helped add a splash of extra color. I didn't want to go too complicated, as scenery back then wasn't the huge deal it was now, and most mappers didn't spend over 20 hours on the scenery alone. Overall, I think I did a good job balancing out the risks of going back to previous mapping trends while sticking with the strengths of today's standards, coupled with simpler scenery to really sell that 2020 vibe. I think I nailed it, but now that it was track of the day, would everyone else share my positive outlook? Now, it's time to go over the stats. What did the hard numbers have to say about my map? Well, when I first sent Old School through map review, I was shocked. The people chatting seemed to really like it, which is a good sign, but not the final indicator of what their scores would be. I was hoping for the best, but was still unprepared for the perfect 5-star rating at 10 votes. It didn't last too long, but man, that felt good. The score fell a bit more, but the map was still reviewed with a 4.6 rating at 56 votes. Not my best score, but still pretty good. Given that the map was a bit more experimental than my previous tracks, I was a little nervous, but really hoping that Old School would make it through. I don't have a great track record of getting through Nadeo, but all my concerns went away once Old School was revealed on May 8th. I was watching some streams and most players seemed to have a very positive response. Well, the ones that were playing at least. This was also around the time Deep Dip 2 was released, and a lot of people were busy with that. Still, the reception remained mostly positive, and I was excited to see the scores. There's a Discord bot that collects votes from a wide variety of servers and averages them out to give a community score. The votes range from triple minus to triple plus, translating to numbers -3 to +3. At the end of the day, the votes were tallied, and Old School 2020 ended up with an average score of 0.7. Not an amazing score, but anything in the positives is pretty good. I do consider Discord the place more established players hang out, so if veteran players I was targeting as my audience like the map, what about the new guys? Well, if the experienced players talk on Discord, to get some more casual opinions, I headed to Reddit. I wasn't really sure what to expect as I opened the thread, but as I did and started reading the comments, a majority of people seemed to really like it here as well, and someone even said that this was way fresher than anything else in a while. I do want to give a small shout out to the user who said that they always love me a good Nolifus map. Just thank you. You know, it's kind of cool that someone remembers my name and that they associate it with a fun map, and just wanted to say thanks for the nice comment. Flaccid Father 15, I appreciate it. Well, anyway, moving on. It looked like the overall community's reception was positive. It might not have been a big, groundbreaking map, but people seemed to enjoy the fact that the map did something players haven't experienced in a while, and tried to be different. I'll go more into the specifics of what went well and what didn't in a bit, but before I do, I want to take a look at the world record run of 48.795 by Dividids. It's going on in the background right now, and I'm very happy with it. That might be a bit of a weird statement to make. After all, I didn't drive the world record, but two of my previous track of the day maps were cut, and the other one featured a reactor zoo. So the fact that this run is on the intended lines and is just clean without any weird tricks is a big deal for me. I will take it. I sent this map to a few people to check for cuts, and it looks like it paid off. And congrats to Dividids for the world record. It is well deserved. So now I've covered how players thought of the map overall. People generally thought it was good, maybe not like groundbreaking or anything, but a fun map that brought some fresh ideas to the table, even if the fresh ideas were inspired by previous maps. But now I'd like to take a look at the specifics. What did people like? What did people not like? And I always like to start with the negatives. I actually think this is the map I've gotten track of the day with that has the least amount of cons, which is interesting because this isn't my highest map score. The reason for that, I believe, is the concept itself. The map was either a nice nostalgia trip taking people back to what maps were like at the beginning, or an awkward tech route with basic scenery. Don't get me wrong, the route was still good, but one of the comments I kept getting was, "This looks like it came straight out of an official 2020 campaign. Nice job." If you remember those maps fondly, this is a plus. But if you don't, then the map probably isn't going to come across that great. So right off the bat, the subject matter I chose was going to split the player base. I don't think it's a big deal or anything, but it was interesting seeing the different opinions and how it really worked for some people, while others just said they didn't get it. Talking about the route itself, there was one spot I saw a few people complaining about, and that's the turnaround at the top of the big jump. The common sentiment was that it was too blind. I actually don't think it's even the most blind part of the map. The U-turn before the jump had less vision of the exit, but I think having two blind turns back to back made the second one stand out more. Like I said previously, a bit of blindness was intentional, but maybe two blind turns that close to each other wasn't the best idea. I could have also removed some of the hills that blocked the vision, but having everything remain smooth might have let some cuts come up or enable a triangle checkpoint that I wasn't intending. The car was very close to getting gear 5 at this point, so I needed a tighter element to slow the car down, but I could have done some things a bit different to increase vision. Some people hopped onto my stream that night and said they hated this tree near the end as well. But if you hit the tree, you were going to clip an edge and bump your car anyway, not to mention how the correct line through the turn doesn't even come close to the tree. So if you're hitting that tree, there are other problems you messed up. Outside of those areas, I didn't really hear any complaints. I hit the idea I was going for, and some people liked it, while others didn't care for it. If that's the biggest complaint, I think that's a success. Now that I've talked about what the map didn't do well, it's time to go over the things that went right, starting off with the route. While it was awkward at times, I propped up the gimmick with a well thought out track. I feel like I say it in every one of my track of the day review videos, but the route was strong. The turns were varied and the elements took the car all over the place. It wasn't just a flat road with a few turns, it was a route with a lot of different things to keep the player's attention. I take a lot of time testing, tweaking, and getting feedback to make sure my weird ideas don't overpower the map and make it feel like a cheap trick. Sure, I could have made things a bit smoother, but everything in the map served a purpose and flowed together well, and the fact that it wasn't perfectly calculated made it stand out from the other track of the day maps. Just enough to be a good thing. Aside from the route, I really like the visual look of the map. Over the years, the combination of grass and wood has garnered the reputation that it's a beginner's map. They're often the first scenery blocks newer builders attempt to make a map visually appealing with, and have been since the game first came out. So I knew I had to use that combo once I had settled on a route, and only plain wood was available because the different colors didn't show up on the supports during release. This wasn't my first attempt at this style of scenery, as I've had a few maps try this out before, and I really liked the look of the scenery when done well, but each attempt previously had comments from map review that said the look was basic and not interesting. So I knew I really had to try and go a bit off the wall to get it to work. I didn't go too far out there, but I've used what I've learned about building scenery over the years and focused on layers. Basically, I made sure that at almost all times, the car is constantly driving over and under the scenery, as well as right next to and far away from large structures. And that's where I think the map's scenery elevated it past my previous attempts. Not only was the car's distance from the structures varied, the structures themselves differed from each other, and the player wasn't just driving under the same arch 10 times. Despite the simple look of the map, there's a lot of thought that went into the structures and where to place them. I also like building large landscapes rather than tiny details, so this was a perfect excuse to not worry about detailing. The last major plus I want to go over is something I've already covered, but it really is what tied the whole map together, and that's the theme. The reason I got away with the route being slightly awkward and blind and the scenery being a bit basic was because I grounded those ideas in a bigger picture. Had the route been made with more modern scenery, I don't think it would have been as well received. And the same goes with the scenery being paired with an older style route. Players knew exactly what I built the map for the second they loaded into the map, and I think that's the biggest strength. It all makes sense, and people are just along for the nostalgia trip. I know I really wanted players to understand that, and that's where the name comes from. Typically, I like to have a shorter, more poetic name for my maps, but I didn't want to leave anything to chance, so I spelt it out for everyone. Everything was about the early days of the game, and no one was going to miss that. In all my maps, I try to keep a cohesive theme, and Old School 2020 was no exception. Once my map's time was up as track of the day, I was very happy with how everything turned out. I not only hit my goal of making an old school style map, but it was also well received by the community. I definitely have a better grasp of why the meta is where it's currently at, as well as some possible options to continue to push it further. The strongest thing I have going for my maps is the playtesting phase, so I better keep that up. And while the map wasn't perfect, there were some blind spots and the concept itself won't be for everyone, I think I nailed what I was going for. So thank you, everyone who ended up playing it. And now I'm curious, what did you think of the map? Did you share the majority's opinion that it was pretty solid, or did you just not like it at all? I'll be reading all of the comments left down below, so let me know what you thought. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more Trackmania mapping content, don't forget to like and subscribe. I also host viewer map review on my Twitch every Wednesday night, so join my Discord and you can submit your map a day early. And I think that's it. The only thing left to do is to say thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch my video. I really do appreciate it. But now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to make a map all about what the meta will be in 3030. Bye!